But we start this hour by talking about the news out of New England that Mike Vrabel is headed to the Patriots as their next head coach. And a guy who knows Mike Vrabel and wrote an amazing story detailing the last year for Vrabel as he stepped down or was fired from the Titans role and was a consultant with the Cleveland Browns is Zach Rosenblatt, who covers both the Jets and the NFL for The Athletic, and he's nice enough to join us now on the show. Zach, appreciate your time today. Thanks for hopping on.
No problem. How you doing, Jake?
Hanging in, man. So you know Mike Vrabel about as well as anyone. You spent so much time with him over the last year. What was your initial reaction to seeing the news that he's going back to the Patriots as their coach?
You know, both from spending time with him and just reading the tea leaves and knowing what he's looking for and his history with them, like the minute that job came open, it was pretty obvious, I think, to everybody that was where he was going to land. It didn't come as a surprise. If anything, I would say that the unfortunate part is I do think the Jets had a real shot at him if the Patriots job didn't open up. And so now instead, because, you know, the Jets can't get nice things, they instead have to get tortured by him for a long time. But, you know, it didn't surprise me at all, but it is, you know, it's just kind of the way this was going once Mayo got fired.
What were your thoughts on the perception that, oh, he's just using the Jets and that's why he met with them first? Do you think there's any truth to that?
No, I don't. And I've pushed back on that. It's an easy thing to look at and say, well, why would he interview with the Jets? And with, you know, if he didn't want to take the Patriots job, like if he wasn't trying to pressure them into doing that. But I promise you that is not how he operated. He went to that Jets interview fully interested in willing to listen to what they had to offer. At that point, the Patriots job hadn't opened. He wasn't taking that interview to pressure the Patriots. He was taking it because he was interested. And he didn't take interviews with the Saints. He didn't take them with the Jaguars, and those teams all want to interview him. So I think that is just people, you know, reading the tea leaves or, you know, making assumptions based on the information they have. But I do not believe he did that to pressure the Patriots into firing Mayo. I think the way the Patriots went about it, I think it seemed pretty clear to me they had planned on firing him anyway. That's not information I have. That's kind of how I read the situation. And so, no, I do not think he used the Jets, even if it's hard not to think that based on what transpired.
Zach Rosenblatt joining us here on the Jake Asman Show at ESPN New York. Zach covers the Jets and the NFL for The Athletic and wrote a detailed story highlighting Mike Vrabel's year away from being an NFL head coach. So, of course, Vrabel goes to the Pats, and we had to get Zach on to talk about that. I'm curious, Zach, your colleague at The Athletic, Diana Rossini, she reported that, quote, despite consistent and late pushes from the Bears and the Jets, New England's the team that lands them. What does she mean by late pushes? Did the Jets, like, as of even today, potentially have communication with Mike Vrabel?
Yeah, I don't know if it happened today specifically, but yeah, I do know that, you know, they interviewed him very early in the process. They were, I don't know if blown away is the right word. It's probably used a little too much in these interview processes, but they were, you know, very comfortable with the idea of him leading their organization. And then they've done all these other interviews, and I don't think the other candidates impressed them as much as Mike did. So they came back and they said, is there anything we can do to convince you to take the job? And I just think ultimately the Patriots, both because of his history with them and what they had to offer, both in terms of quarterback, his ability to kind of help shape the front office and all these things, like they had everything he was looking for. And not to say that the Jets didn't, but the Jets don't have a quarterback right now for the long term. So, you know, ultimately he was always going to end up in New England as long as they offered him what he wanted, and they clearly did that.
So what is the latest now with the Jet search? We know they had 5 GM interviews yesterday. That brings it up to 13 candidates for that role. What is the latest with the search for a GM and coach?
Yeah, you know, I think this is a process that's going to play out as it does. Like, I think they have a lot of other guys they still need to bring in, a few of the coaches from these teams that are still in the playoffs, guys like Brian Flores and a few of the other coaches that they haven't had a chance to meet with yet virtually. Yeah, you know, I don't think they're going to rush it. I think they're doing their due diligence. I think the number has been astronomical in terms of the amount of guys they've interviewed on GM and head coaches. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. It's just a lot. But they're doing their due diligence. I don't think they've had an interview yet where they're like, we're 100% hiring this guy right now. And I don't know that they're looking for that necessarily or if it's realistic to expect it. But I think they're still open to the idea that they haven't interviewed their future head coach yet.
Do you expect him to go GM first, then coach? It seems like Vrabel maybe was that one guy that they'd say, hey, you're the coach, and then you get to help hire your GM. But now with him off the board, what are your thoughts on where things head in that regard?
Yeah. I lean towards them hiring the GM first. I don't think they're necessarily saying, like, we are 100% hiring the GM first, and then we'll get the head coach. If there's a coach, you know, like, again, Vrabel, obviously, like you said, he was the one that you would give him what he wants. You let him help the GM search. If there's another candidate they love in that way, then I think they would let him be a part of the GM search. But I think ultimately, yeah, I think the GM is going to be the one they hire first, unless it's something where it becomes a sort of package type deal where you go Flores, Griggs in, or something like that, like where you pull two people from the same organization. Maybe they don't hire back to back, but I think that I could see that happening.
Zach Rosenblatt, who covers the Jets for The Athletic, is with us here on ESPN New York. Jake Asman with you till 2:30 today. Zach, as far as the process, right? You talked about the amount of names, and I'm with you. I have no issue with talking to as many people as possible. My issue, though, as a fan of the Jets, is that I see a guy like John Gruden who wants back in, Pete Carroll who wants back in, and he's interviewed already with two teams. Why have the Jets not, to this point, spoken with either Gruden or Carroll, especially Carroll, because, of course, there's two other teams that he's already spoken to?
Yeah, the Gruden one I don't really have a good read on. I know there was some buzz about him being a candidate this cycle. It doesn't seem like any team has interviewed him. I do think that the Jets are open to interviewing more candidates they haven't yet. So, like, just because, they haven't requested an interview with Liam Cohen or Todd Monken or something like that doesn't necessarily mean they 100% won't. But I think the flip side of this is that the candidates themselves have to also want to interview with the Jets. And I'm not saying I know that Pete Carroll said, I have no interest in your job, but I think that, Ben Johnson put it out there that he had no interest in the Jets job. And I think there are probably some other candidates who feel that way. And so if the Jets feel like they're going into an interview with a person who has no interest in the job, then maybe they feel like they don't want to do it. So I know Pete Carroll, it was a long time ago, but the Jets fired him after 1 year. And it's certainly possible that he still holds that in his mind when he's making this decision.
Look, I get being petty. I'm petty as well, but it's a different owner. It was 1994 they fired him after 1 year. Come on, Pete. If that's the
like
real
I said,
reason.
I don't know if that's the reason. I'm just saying, I know there are people, especially NFL coaches, who hold grudges for a long time. Like, I've heard stories about, not Pete Carroll, but these coaches that had a bad interaction with somebody years ago, and then they still hold it against them. So you never know with these guys.
We heard a lot from people around the team that the Jets would really prefer experience with these hires, Zach. Do you expect either the GM or coach, or maybe both, to have previous experience in the jobs they'd be hired for?
I don't necessarily think it'll 100% be someone who is experienced, but I would be surprised if at least one of them isn't somebody who held that past job, whether that's the head coach or the GM. I don't think they're going to hire two inexperienced people this time. And it wouldn't shock me if they hired two experienced people. But, yeah, I don't think they want a first-time GM and a first-time head coach is the vibe I get.
Zach Rosenblatt covers the Jets for The Athletic. He's with us here on the Jake Asman Show on ESPN New York. As far as Aaron Rodgers' future goes, I know Woody Johnson was on the record with Brian Costello in the New York Post saying that his future is going to be tied to what the next regime wants. Should Jet fans actually believe that? Do you feel Aaron Rodgers' future is actually going to be tied to the next GM and head coach?
I mean, that's the message they've been putting out there. I think that's the message they've been trying to get across, is that Woody is not going to dictate who the quarterback's going to be. But I also know the flip side of this is Aaron has gone out of his way to take shots at either Woody. He made a joke about his son. He's basically challenged Woody to cut him right after the season ended. So I think that's all going to be in the back of what he said. And I don't know if the coaches or GMs that have interviewed, if they've come up with a plan for how they would go about Aaron Rodgers, whether they want to keep him or not. I don't think that necessarily around the league, it's the most appealing idea to come to a situation with Aaron Rodgers, just, as a 42-year-old quarterback coming off all these injuries and all the stuff that comes with it, with him having to run the offense or wanting to and all that stuff. So there's a lot of factors at play. I do think ultimately, if a head coach comes in and is like, I want Aaron to be my quarterback, I think Woody will be open to that, but I still lean towards him playing somewhere else next year.
I want to throw an outside-the-box name at you, Zach, because Adam Schefter reported on NFL Countdown today that at least one team in the last week or so reached out to inquire about Mike Tomlin, who has a full no trade with the Steelers. But if the Steelers were to even entertain moving on from Mike Tomlin, would you anticipate the Jets would move heaven and earth, like I hope they would as a fan, to try and bring in a coach of that caliber?
Yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate what-if question right now, and hypothetical, but I do. I think that they would absolutely be interested. I think they would make the call. The question would be, would Woody be willing to, number one, pay the money? Like Mike Tomlin already is one of the highest paid, and he probably would ask for more money if a team was trading a first-round pick for him. And they also have to be willing to trade draft picks. But, I mean, that's what we all talk about, and I'm sure you talk about it on your show all the time, is the Jets need a culture setter. They need somebody who's going to hold people accountable. They need somebody who can build a winner, has proven the ability to do that, I think. And so Tomlin is as good as it comes if he's available. But they wouldn't be the only team that would want him at the end of the day, too. Like, Mike Tomlin would have to want to choose the Jets. It's a two-way street. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, I absolutely think they would be involved if that becomes a real thing.
Zach, final question, then we'll let you run. And, of course, no one's going to hold you to this. It's going to change. But if you had to guess right now who the next GM and coach would be for the Jets, who would that be?
So I have something coming tomorrow where I'm predicting all the job openings, head coach-wise. And for the Jets, I'm putting Brian Flores is where I'm leaning. And if it's Flores, then I think you probably can count on Ryan Grigson being the tandem. And I know that latter part is not something Jets fans are particularly excited about, but I think around the league, people think that Grigson's learned a lot from what went wrong in Indianapolis. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, prediction-wise.
I'll tell you what, I love Flores. Grigson just scares me because, I mean, yeah, he had a winning record in Indy, but his future Hall of Fame quarterback also retired at age 29 because they couldn't build an offensive line around him.
I will say the Jets do have a pretty good offensive line in place already. So if you're worried about that, at least he only has to deal with right tackle at least. So
that is a good point. Zach, really appreciate the time. Thanks so much for a couple minutes today.
Yeah, thanks, Jake.
Zach Rosenblatt, Jet reporter for The Athletic, covers the NFL as well.